So, interleukin 1. And interleukin 2, these cytokines. They are going to help activate more T cells and then help those T cells proliferate, make clones of themselves. So our T cells, the types of T cells that we're going to have: helper T cells, cytotoxic T cells, memory T cells. Just like their name implies, they're either going to help something, they're either going to lyse a cell, or they're going to become a memory cell. Helper T cell, the ones that are going to help incorporate some more T cells and help T cells proliferate.
Are those the interleukins?
The good example is the interleukins. The cytotoxic T cell. These are the ones that can bind to the cell, release the perforins that create the perforation in the cell that it's attacking, and because it's cytotoxic, that cell gets destroyed. The memory cells, the T cells that get activated for the first time response. Okay? As those T cells make the clones don't go and fight the response, fight the antigen, fight the invader at all. Their only job, become the memory. This is during the first time response only. Because if we create the memory cell and we get invaded by that pathogen again, the memory T cell gets to mount the attack. And in that attack, more memory cells will be made so that if you get invaded again, start the process again.
Is that why when you're infected with mono once, you can't get sick again?
Mm-hmm.
So once the T cells presented with the macrophage of that antigen, it would go to the lymph node and clone itself before it went and fought that antigen?
Which one are we talking about
For the
cloning
first time.
itself?
For the first time.
For the first time,
Yeah.
the
So it
T
would
cell,
clone itself
as
before it
the
went out
T
and fought it.
as the T cell begins to get activated and it begins to incorporate some more T cells and get those T cells to begin to make the clones for every process. So let's say T cell 1 gets activated, okay? And it incorporates the help of 9 other T cells. We now have 10 T cells that got activated. And of those 10 T cells, they're all trying to fight the one pathogen, okay? So, all 10 of them are now going to begin making copies. So, 10 becomes 20, 20 becomes 40, 40 becomes 80, and their job is to go fight that pathogen. Of the 10 that got activated, for each time, for that first response, for 1 through 10, each one creates a set of memory cells. So in 10, let's say 10 T cells, 10 different lymph nodes, the first time in that creating copies of themselves, making the clones. A certain number of them don't go fight. They go back to a lymph node and sit. They don't necessarily, they'll proliferate in the lymph node, and some will stay behind. They don't go out and fight. The rest of them move to go fight it. Does that make sense? So if they activated 10 of them, all 10 will create a memory cell. So let's say if we had 10 that were activated and each one created 2 memory cells, we now have 20 memory cells throughout 10 lymph nodes. And if we get invaded by that pathogen again, those memory T cells automatically recognize it and mount their attack. And once again, they'll do it by creating those cytokines, increasing in their numbers, and move out and go fight. And you probably don't even know you got invaded again. Does that make sense? So we're going to find that for the T cells, helper, cytotoxic, memory, every time, when we activate them, okay, when we activate those T cells, no matter what happens for activation, we'll always get a memory. When we activate them, we can activate them to be a helper or cytotoxic, or both.
I don't want to jump ahead, but I had this in my head because my boyfriend was saying somewhere in Mexico someone was injecting bananas with AIDS and they were being sent. So in my head I'm thinking that with that being such a powerful virus, I mean,
What?
sorry.
You
If you're exposed, so I mean, so your body's naturally doing it.
Two
So
of them every day.
So if you, in that case where you eat the banana that actually has the AIDS in it, how does, you can actually see the blood apparently. When you cut open your banana, it's red. They're coming from Mexico. I don't know what part, it was, so this is just making my head going.
Okay,
Okay.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
So, I mean, obviously it's not like, I mean, it wasn't like you had HIV first or was exposed to it and worked into it.
They were actually injecting their blood into the peeling around the banana.
Yep, into the banana. Apparently the banana's red. When you cut into the banana, it's red. But so it's actually the actual AIDS virus.
The blood.
Yeah, the blood. And so you eat it. It just, so my head is thinking, you know, with all these cells, you can't,
If
I mean,
we
it's
ingest
too
it,
much.
If
It's
we
too much.
ingest it,
Yeah.
what's going to happen? Is that what you're trying to ask?
I'm thinking that that's just way too powerful from what we're talking about, because you're talking about like just regular daily.
No, if you're
Everything?
exposed. I worked with a professor, it's been a while, who was a biochemist, and he was working in research about the HIV virus and how in some people they can be exposed to it.
It's a hoax.
Thank goodness.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
The virus die though in the banana?
Yeah,
It would
on
die
several
in the
levels.
stomach itself.
It could. Okay. See, there's a lot of misinformation about viruses out there. Okay. AIDS doesn't, because AIDS can be killed by oxygen. Okay, so that's why it can only be surviving in fluids and pass by the bodily fluids, because the open air kills the virus. Yeah. Okay. There are people who have the immune system that it doesn't take over.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of controversy still over that. Okay. Now, the research that I've kind of kept up with is you have to have repeated exposure. So in order to develop that, because the first response, okay, the body is going to move into the third line of defense. And depending upon the amount of the virus, it could take care of it. But let's say you're exposed to it again and then again, it can't. And that's when the AIDS virus will take over. And because it's a retrovirus, that's why the body has a difficult time mounting the attack.
What's a retrovirus?
That's where, rather than using DNA as the genetic material, it uses the RNA. And that's much harder for the body to mount the attack against. The other thing about viruses as a whole, okay, depending upon the virus, a virus is not alive until it gets in a host, okay? There are viruses around us right now that we're exposing ourselves to. Every time you touch the table, every time you touch the door handle, every time you touch your book, every time you touch your phone, every time you touch your water bottle, every time you touch the top on, every time you put your hand on something, your body on something, you're exposing it to a virus. The question is it able to get into something like the mucous membranes, into the eye, into the mouth, up the nose, down the throat, giving it the environment it needs to become alive? It's like Frankenstein.
Aren't some airborne though that become alive?
Some of them are airborne, and if you inhale, sniff, get it in your eye, whatever the case may be, you got it. Okay? So there's a lot of misconception about viruses, but no matter how you look at it, viruses are not alive until you give them the host that they need, which is your internal body.
But with AIDS and HIV, it has to be blood. Right?
Yes, some of the viruses are passed by bodily fluids. Think about Hep A, think about Hep C, think about Hep B, think about Hep G, F.
You can't get HIV or AIDS from someone's urine, can you?
Sure you can.
If you drink it.
What if they sneeze on it?
If you sneeze on it and you have something that has been open to your internal environment, there's a possibility. Don't let, okay, when HIV first came out, okay, the controversy around it is what made this such a scary virus, okay? If you ever want to understand the controversy around it, find a very old movie called And the Band Played On, okay? And it'll give you a very good background. I don't even know if it's available anymore. But the controversy surrounding it is what has given this huge stigma, okay? The AIDS virus has actually been around for a really long time, all right? It's just that with, you know, our accessibility to areas, okay, it became something that became prevalent here in the United States and in some of the other developed countries, okay? And just because you might get exposed the one time does not mean you're going to get it.
I have 3 patients right now with AIDS.
HIV positive.
HIV.
Well, they have the full-blown AIDS?
2 of them have full-blown AIDS. One of
Okay.
them has HIV and syphilis. So
Encephalitis?
no, syphilis.
Syphilis. Okay.
So one of them likes to urinate everywhere. So
Cool. I should be
triple
interested.
glove when I go in there. But someone told me that you can only get it if he's like bleeding and gets inside of a cut.
disagree with that. Okay? I do a little more research on it, and until you know 100%,
Yeah, because I wear like
Yeah.
3 gloves every time I go in the
Yeah.
room.
I would do your protective measures. Yeah. Just saying.
Should I wear a mask?
The AIDS virus is not airborne.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not airborne. HIV is not airborne.
Like 80% of AIDS is sexually transmitted.
Yes.
Because I had to do a project on AIDS for my micro class, and it's like less than 1% chance,
Okay.
or something like that. Unless you're like really laying deep in his pee, you're not gonna get it.
No.
And look at your hands.
Yeah, he is. I'm not.
Yeah.
And I
And,
don't-
you know, I see